Welcome to the deep dive. Today we're doing something a little different. We're setting aside our usual topics for what you might call an extreme physics thought experiment.
We're taking some really fascinating analytical sources and applying hard, real-world physics to a fictional scenario.
And it is a wild one. We're looking at Satoru Gojo's defense technique from Jujutsu Kaisen, the Limitless, or Mukagen.
Right. And we're asking a very simple question. What happens when you pit it against the most destructive force humanity has ever created?
The scenario couldn't be clearer. Can this ability, which, theoretically creates an infinite space between Gojo and an attack?
Can it nullify a direct hit from a 1 megaton thermonuclear warhead?
And not just a near miss. The subject is standing at the exact hypocenter, ground zero.
So before we even get into how the defense works, we have to establish the scale of the threat. It's immense.
Okay, so let's break it down. Let's start with the heat. What kind of temperatures are we actually talking about when that warhead goes off?
We're looking at an initial fireball that reaches temperatures of roughly 100 million degrees Celsius.
100 million?
Yeah, and just for context, that's about 5 to 6 times hotter than the core of the sun.
So it's not melting things, it's vaporizing them.
Instantly.
Yeah.
Solid matter just becomes gas.
The sources had this great comparison, which I think sums it up perfectly.
Oh, the chopstick one?
Yeah. Surviving this is like being microwaved inside a supernova while trying to hold back a tsunami with a single wet chopstick.
It really gets at the multiple simultaneous threats. It's not just the heat, it's the speed of it all.
Right. So what are we talking about speed-wise? The kinetic force, the radiation?
Well, the shock wave, the overpressure wave, expands at over Mach 20.
Mach 20.
But the really deadly part, the ionizing radiation, so your gamma rays, your X-rays, that travels at the absolute speed limit of the universe.
The speed of light.
299,792,458 meters per second.
Okay. So, impossible heat, unbelievable force, all moving at light speed. Let's unpack this. The defense is supposed to manipulate space, but the sources say the first point of failure isn't the shield breaking, it's internal.
Exactly. We have to start with the biological catastrophe. Specifically, what happens inside the sorcerer's brain.
Because the six eyes are what run the defense, right? It's not just a passive wall.
It's an active, real-time calculation engine. It has to analyze every single incoming threat vector.
Like the world's most powerful CPU running the most demanding program ever written.
And that's precisely the problem. To filter something like the initial pulse of gamma radiation, the brain would have to detect and calculate the trajectory of roughly 10 to the power of 26 individual photons.
Wait, say that number again?
10 to the 26. And that's per nanosecond.
Per nanosecond. I mean, a modern supercomputer does maybe 10 to the 18th calculations per second. It's just orders of magnitude beyond that.
And all that processing, all that friction, it generates an incredible amount of heat.
So the brain literally cooks itself.
That's what the sources conclude. They call it instantaneous thermal runaway. The sheer volume of information processing means the internal temperature of the brain just skyrockets.
It's a brutal irony. The defense mechanism kills him before the blast even gets there.
The brain turns into, and I'm quoting here, boiling fondue. It's killed by its own processing power.
Okay, but let's say, for the sake of argument, the brain can handle it. What's the next problem? We have this barrier now in an environment that's become a superheated radioactive vacuum.
This is where the defense becomes deadly in a whole new way. If the barrier's job is to filter out anything dangerous,
which the air at ground zero definitely is,
then it has to block that ambient air entirely. It has to create a perfect seal.
But if you block everything outside, you've just cut off your own oxygen supply.
Exactly. Before the heat or radiation even matter, you're dealing with immediate suffocation. Hypoxia.
The perfect defense creates a perfect vacuum-sealed container around you.
You become what the sources call a sorcerer sous vide. You die from a lack of oxygen inside your own shield.
A total system failure. And we still haven't even touched on light itself.
Right, the thermal radiation, the infrared, is moving at light speed. So how does the barrier handle photons?
Can I even tell the difference between a good photon and a bad one?
It's a classic catch-22. If the sorcerer blocks all light to stop the heat, he's instantly blind, which, makes the whole six eyes calculation thing a bit difficult.
And if he lets light in?
The sheer luminosity, just the brightness from a 100 million degree fireball would boil his retinas instantly. The light itself is a weapon.
And there's another layer to this, the act of manipulating space, of bending it to create this infinity, that has its own consequences,
It's a
right?
huge one.
Yeah.
The sources point out that the distorted space around the barrier would effectively act as a gravitational lens.
Like a magnifying glass.
Exactly. It would take all that superheated plasma outside the barrier and focus the ambient thermal radiation from it directly onto the subject.
So even if the blast itself never touches him, the shield becomes a lens that cooks him with focused energy.
The very act of defense becomes a focusing dish for lethal heat.
So we've got brain meltdown, suffocation, retinal boiling, and being cooked by your own shield. That's 4 ways to die before we even get to the big picture.
Which brings us to the environmental impact and the really deep, unavoidable irony of a perfect, unmovable defense.
First, let's just touch on the collateral damage that happens no matter what.
Right. Even without our sorcerer there, everything within a 3.5-kilometer radius is just gone.
Vaporized.
Concrete becomes glass, steel becomes gas. The area is lethally radioactive for decades.
Okay, now here's where it gets really mind-bending. We introduce this unmovable object, the limitless barrier. Physics tells us energy can't be created or destroyed. So what happens to the blast wave?
It has to go somewhere. And if the barrier is a perfect reflection, an infinite wall,
It bounces off.
it rebounds.
Yeah.
But it's not a clean bounce. The incoming shockwave collides with the outgoing reflected shockwave. It's a phenomenon called constructive interference.
Which means the waves add together.
Their amplitudes multiply. So what you've essentially done is double the explosive yield in the opposite direction.
Wait, you've made the bomb stronger?
In the direction of the rebound, yes. You've amplified the destruction simply by introducing a perfect defense.
That is just staggering. The act of perfectly protecting yourself guarantees that an additional city block or more gets obliterated.
It completely reframes the question. It's not just can he survive, but should he survive? If the cost is guaranteed, amplified collateral damage.
The defense itself becomes an offensive weapon against the surroundings. Is perfect defense ever truly passive?
Probably not. When you're dealing with this level of energy, it has to go somewhere.
So, given that our sources call this feat class S absurdity, and that classical physics seems to say it's impossible on every level, what are the escape hatches? How could this possibly work?
Well, there are 2 main hypotheses that bend the rules a bit. The first one, hypothesis A, takes the spatial manipulation idea to a really weird and cold extreme.
This is the infinity concept.
Right. The idea isn't that it blocks the blast, but that it infinitely divides the distance the blast has to travel. So half the remaining distance, then a quarter, then an eighth.
So the blast wave is forced to travel an infinite distance to reach his skin.
And in doing so, it has to lose all its energy. It cools down. All that heat, all that radiation, theoretically cools to absolute zero. 0 Kelvin.
It creates a tiny frozen universe right in the middle of a nuclear fire.
That's one way to solve the heat problem, yeah. It doesn't block the energy, it just dissipates it through infinite travel.
Okay, that's one loophole. What's hypothesis B? This one deals with the brain problem, right?
And the suffocation problem. This theory suggests the 6 eyes operate on a quantum level. Essentially, it acts like Maxwell's demon on quantum steroids.
Maxwell's demon, the thought experiment about sorting particles one by one.
Precisely. So instead of a big, clumsy wall, it's an impossibly precise filter. It identifies and halts every single dangerous gamma-ray photon,
All 10 to the 26 of them per nanosecond.
while at the same time selectively allowing harmless molecules, like oxygen, to pass through.
So it's filtering reality at the subatomic level.
It would have to be. It solves the radiation problem, the breathing problem in one go, but it assumes a level of computation that, well, it's beyond physics as we know it.
This has been an incredible breakdown. So to sum up the central conflict, the defense has to simultaneously create absolute zero, filter 10 to the 26 particles per nanosecond, and somehow avoid causing a catastrophic rebound effect.
The demands are just mutually exclusive under classical physics. You need to invoke some kind of quantum miracle to even begin to solve it.
And speaking of miracles, we have to end on my favorite detail from the sources. The energy cost. Not for the bomb, but for the sorcerer himself. What would it take, metabolically, just to run his brain for 1 second?
The caloric consumption is just astronomical. To process all those vectors in real time. To track every particle without suffering from instant hypoglycemic shock.
Yeah.
Literally running out of brain fuel.
Yeah.
The subject would need to consume about 45,000 Kikufuku Mochi, those sweet rice cakes per second.
45,000 rice cakes every single second.
Just to keep from dying of brain starvation.
That right there is the true scale of the absurdity. The energy required to simply think about the event is impossible.
And it really gets to the core of this. So what does it all mean? If even a theoretically perfect defense requires this level of absurdity and, at the same time, guarantees collateral damage, what does that say about the limits of any protective technology?
That constructive interference idea is the big takeaway for me. Any perfect shield that reflects energy isn't destroying it, it's just redirecting it.
And often making it worse for everyone else nearby. It's a powerful thing to think about, that in physics, you can't just stop something. The energy always goes somewhere.
A great thought to leave our listeners with. Thank you for joining us for this deep dive.
A pleasure.
We'll catch you next time on The Deep Dive.